Robin Hood Radio presents Stage Right or Not with Michelle Willens. Michelle is a longtime journalist and herself is a published playwright of several theatrical works. She's a frequent contributor to the Huffington Post, Daily Beast, and the Atlantic websites.
So if you were writing a thesis for your theater degree, you could actually do it about the two shows I saw this past week. The comparisons and contrasts turned out to be totally accidental and yet rather astounding. First, I spent 7 hours at the Barrymore Theater. Yes, you heard right. One production, albeit in two parts. Then I caught a work at the Polanski Center in Brooklyn, written by a woman whose work I was not familiar with, but who has obviously impacted many artists, students, and audiences over the decades. But let's start with the epic called The Inheritance. Now, not unlike Tony Kushner's Angels in America, which also deals with a similar theme, The Inheritance expects that you will see both parts, 3.5 hours apiece, either in the same day, as I did, with a dinner break in between, or on separate ones. Now, I did feel about a year older when I walked out Wednesday at 10:45 p.m., but I would recommend if you are going to undertake this experience, you do it this way. Now, emphasis is on the if, because The Inheritance is clearly not a play for everyone. It is certainly not your mother's matinee, or for the sexually squeamish, or the problematic prostate, and most important, not for the homophobic, of which I hope and suspect there are fewer and fewer, certainly among paying theatergoers. Written by Matthew Lopez, the play comes to us from London, where it won most of the major awards. Will it win the Tonys as well? Possibly, though the reviews have been mixed. Award season is a long ways off, and the box office is starting slowly. Remember, almost 80% of Broadway theatergoers these days are out-of-towners. And whether this is how they choose to spend 7 hours, well, it ain't Moulin Rouge or one of the endless jukeboxes. That said, The Inheritance is an admirable and ambitious piece. You might even say it could be the last necessary word on the gay movement, past, present, and future. Now, that's not to say there won't be plays with gay characters, but maybe we finally have reached a point when they will just be called characters. Lopez's opus is big and bold and very sad, and yes, very funny at times. He broke his mother's heart when he went to Yale, remarks one Princeton grad. Yes, every mother's nightmare, comes a response. I think gays should not have to pay taxes, remarks another to loud applause. The play is also rather messy in that the author is telling us so many stories and revealing so much information over a relatively short period of time. It's hard to keep up on or, frankly, tie up any thread. While it is not mandatory, it helps if you know something of E.M. Forster's book, Howard's End. The storyline is somewhat similar, though with most of the genders switched, so you may need a scorecard. Forster himself is an in and out, in many ways, a character here, part professor, part confessor, part narrator. Though you should know that everyone narrates in this one, at least 7 or 8 characters reporting on their thoughts and movements in the third, not first person. That's as if you heard me now say, Michelle started talking about the play, and then Michelle asked Jill what she thought. Well, I found that device tiresome and distancing. I get that they are writing their own stories in a sense, but I always prefer characters to show more than tell. You do become involved with 4 men here, in particular, over 3 generations. And just when you thought nothing could be dramatized anew about the period when AIDS took out an entire generation, well, the way the first act concludes will move you to fresh tears. Now, in terms of stagecraft, there is very little, not a set per se. The full group of performers stay on stage most of the time, responding to one another, some playing more than one part, most importantly Samuel Levine, who plays 2 big ones. He, along with Andrew Burnap, John Benjamin Hickey, and Kyle Soller, are all giving legitimately thrilling performances. While there is little nudity, the sex scenes are graphic, often harsh, the language the same. There may be more talk than I believe I've ever heard on a stage, much of it going fast and furious, and a few too many endings. One observer said there is more breadth than depth in The Inheritance, and I have to agree. Though Matthew Lopez gives us some beautiful sentiments, they were married 26 years. Mostly it was a succession of dinners. Henry was the only man I ever needed to be loved by. Houses hide their flaws better than the people in them. Does the play stay with you? Well, it's too much to digest, but yes, of course it does. It ultimately serves as a warning, not necessarily about the next deadly virus, but about the need to find compassion and acceptance and healing wherever we can. And now the rather amazing contrast. The production at the Polanski Center is called Fei-Fu and Her Friends, written in 1977 by a Cuban woman named Maria Irene Fornes, who died last year. Now, apparently her work, including this one, has been taught and performed in many a drama school, and she herself has been an inspiration and mentor of many American writers, male and female. Once she came to this country, she lived primarily in the West Village, hanging with the artsy and literary crowd. And this is the first time, I think, in 4 decades that her work has been performed in New York on a major stage. This play, a combination of immersion, Freudism, and surrealism, follows 8 women who meet at a New England house in 1935 to prepare for a charity event. The audience spends the first 40 minutes watching from their seats, then they break up into groups, which visit 4 small sets behind the stage or around the stage to watch individual scenes involving a few characters each. This moving around can get a bit wearying, but it's cleverly directed. While you're watching one scene, you can occasionally hear the words from another that you recall. When you hear raucous laughter, you have that familiar feeling of being at the wrong table at the wrong time. In one, you actually don headphones and look down through a plexiglass floor to watch one of the characters hallucinate in bed. But by the time you return to your seat, you have surely gotten to know the characters better. I had no idea we were going to do theater, says one of them, eliciting laughter, when the women reconvene to practice for their event. There is good humor here, most taking aim, and there are a few gunshots, be warned, at a time of male dominance. My husband married me to have a constant reminder of how loathsome women are, is the rather unforgettable opening line. In contrast to The Inheritance, this one is all female, but in comparison, both deal with groups who have been treated with indifference at best and are seeking true companions. We must be part of a community, says one of Fei-Fu's friends. Amazingly, the words plague, prognosis, and contagion come from the minds and pens of both playwrights, all those years apart. Well, these are unique and challenging works, Jill, but if not for the world of live theater, where else would we get them?
No place, right?
I think not.
And that is the point of the exercise. I mean, it's oversimplified, but as long as you can engage people telling stories, you've got. There have been storytellers since the beginning of time, you know.
Right.
It's just how it's passed on. I think it's quite fascinating though, because as people become more and more enscreened, it just opens an even wider lane for what is required to sit someplace and watch it unfold. A live show.
I know what you're saying. I agree. They're always looking for new and interesting ways, even ones that were written many years ago. What's interesting about the Cuban woman's play is that it was written so long ago, and yet she was almost predicting this kind of immersion theater that we're doing now. And about the storytelling thing, I thought of that. Of course, the way they do The Inheritance, it is. I mean, the characters are on stage at the beginning, literally writing on pads of paper. So we get right away that they're sort of in a writing class. And that's why I say the narration, I get it, because they are theoretically writing their own stories. It becomes tiresome as a conceit, so to speak. The play I saw recently with Mary Louise Parker called The Sound Inside, sort of similar. She's playing a teacher, and she's writing her own story and narrating to the audience in and out of the play. So Storytelling is definitely kind of the theme of the season, I guess you could say.
Stage Right or Not with Michelle Willens, produced in the studios of Robin Hood Radio, robinhoodradio.com.